You're listening to The Resilient Animal. I'm Annie Petersen, Doctor of Education with a Master's in Mental Health Recovery and Trauma-Informed Care. This podcast is an exploration of how helping other living beings can benefit human mental health and well-being, and what makes us all resilient animals. Hi, this is Annie from the Resilient Animal Podcast, and I'm so excited. One of my really good friends, Shannon Kopp, is here today from SoulPaws Recovery Project. Thank you so much, Shannon, for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited.
Absolutely. Well, I know that our listeners can't see, but I'm looking at Shannon's beautiful face right now, and it makes me really happy. And I have been wanting to interview you, Shannon, for a really long time. You're a very busy lady with 2 young children. But I just want to hand the floor over to you and just tell us your story. It's such an amazing story, and I'm just going to stop talking now. So go ahead, Shannon.
Sure. Well, Annie, thank you so much for the opportunity to be on the Resilient Animal Podcast. And we have such a special friendship that goes so way back, and you're a part of my story. So, you know, it all feels to me that the story begins at the San Diego Humane Society, where I met you in the early 2000s. I think I started there in 2008, maybe. And
yeah, I started there. I started there in 2004. So yeah, we were kind of around the same time.
Yeah, or maybe it was I don't know. It all blurs together. But about a year prior to that, I had sought treatment for an eating disorder, and it is actually, as we're filming this, it's National Eating Disorders Awareness Week, and like most people, I did not know that I had a serious eating disorder because I didn't see myself on matching kind of our societal narrative of what an eating disorder is that you see on Us Weekly or Lifetime movies, right? Out of the 30 million Americans diagnosed with eating disorders, it's probably a much higher number because it's difficult to get a diagnosis. Only 7% of those are clinically underweight. So I was not underweight. I was somewhat functioning. And yet I had struggled with bulimia and depression for 8 years. And I met someone who's my now husband, who became an incredible support to me. I also had an amazing therapist who let me do community service hours as payment, Dr. Materna, and both of them were like, I was very close to rock bottom, but they said, you don't have to hit rock bottom to get help. It doesn't have to be a crisis. You can decide when you want help. And so I went to a treatment center in the middle of the desert, and I only was able to get a couple days of treatment there due to my insurance, but they had a therapy dog, they had equine therapy, and I experienced that. And then I experienced partial hospitalization treatment for a couple weeks, thanks to my mother and my parents who helped fund that. And I came back to San Diego. And when I started talking to my therapist, she said, there's something that your eyes light up whenever you talk about these horses and this dog. Like, they are lighting up. We need to kind of follow that light. And what most mental health challenges do is they consume you, and you start to identify with them. And so, I was living in my head. There was just a voice in my head that was always there's still a voice in my head. The contents just changed, but I couldn't seem to create any space or distance between it. So it said, you're this, and I believed it. It said, you can't eat this, and I believed it. It said, you're going to get rid of this food you just ate, and I believed it, and I followed it. And it just became my whole life. And to the point where I forgot really who I had been before the eating disorder, which started in high school. Now I'm in my mid 20s, so almost a decade living with this voice. I'm not now, now I'm in my 40s, but I'm saying at the time, at the Humane Society, I was in my mid 20s. Um,
No, I'm sorry. So in that case, I can still be in my
yeah, in that case, yes, for sure. We're
go
decades
back a
younger,
couple decades.
right? But I was like, oh my God, it was this epiphany, just having that brief refrain where there were nurses and doctors and staff that were literally protecting me from myself so I couldn't engage in the eating disorder all day long. And I woke up to like, oh, I was a huge animal lover as a kid. Huge. I was obsessed. Everything I was the one in high school that I chose to write a 25-page essay instead of dissect the frog. I was I wrote Jane Goodall like for weeks on end as a child and would put, it was such a big part of my soul. It was just something that I was so drawn to. And so I followed that light. I ended up interviewing at the San Diego Humane Society and getting a job as a marketing coordinator, which I just describe as it's like just creating little match.com profiles for all the animals, right? And I would take them on TV segments or to events and really my job was just to get to know these incredible animals and help find them homes. And essentially, as much as I loved my job and it was a dream come true, I think we all kind of learn this over and over again in life that outside things don't fix the inner. And I relapsed back into the eating disorder. And there was one morning, I don't know, did you ever meet Buster? There's so many animals.
Yeah, no, I remember Buster.
Remember Buster?
I remember taking, just for those who are listening, I was the education manager there for a number of years, and we would take campers, young campers, in to meet different pets, and Buster was one of them. And he had a really hard time moving. I know that he was on his little bed, well, not little bed, it was kind of a big bed because Buster was kind of a big dog.
Yeah.
And he was so excited that the kids were there. We walked over to him, but as the, the students left, he tried to follow them and he slid right off his little bed or big
Yeah.
bed. And we had to go over and kind of help him back up. But no, I remember Buster really well.
Anyway, Buster was a lab. He was only 4, but he had severe arthritis in his legs because he had been chained to a pole his entire life. He was rescued by our humane investigations officer. So I went into his habitat. We called them habitats. It was a room one morning before the adoption gallery opened. And I didn't yet have an animal of my own because I knew what a responsibility that was, and I could barely get through the day. And so I really kind of turned to these shelter dogs I worked with they felt like my family. And I went to Buster's habitat and it was covered in blankets, probably to prevent that slipping that you're talking about, right? Because he loved people. He wanted to follow people, but he couldn't really move very well. And I started struggling with really dark thoughts, just wanting to give up end my life. I felt like I had failed my family, my boyfriend, these animals. I had the privilege. I mean, out of the millions of Americans or people around the world that have eating disorders, at least in America, the statistics are 10 to 20% get some form of treatment. And the reason for that is complex. There's systemic barriers, financial barriers. There's a lot of stigma. There's a lot of misconceptions that usually the people with eating disorders themselves have, right? We still I think things are getting better, that eating disorders is this young, white, thin person's illness. And I actually did have a lot of those privileges, and yet I still didn't even think I was serious enough, which is really heartbreaking.
Right. And since you're mentioning that, Shannon, I'm so sorry. I do want to cut in. I mentioned that I would like you to talk about your book. Shannon did write a wonderful book called Pound for Pound. But I have to say, back to what you were just saying about treatment, it was when I was reading your book that I, even though you can know that those issues are always stand in the way of recovery. When you were talking in the book about the expense of trying to get treatment and
Mhm.
how you were trying to do everything you could to get the treatment you needed, but
Mhm.
because of it, the insurance and the outside costs, it just
Mhm.
really prevented you from being able to do that. And I think that right now, with health insurance is such, it's always an issue,
Yep.
especially right now, though. So I just wanted to bring that up. It was the
Yeah.
first time that I really consciously thought of that as being an impediment.
And, that's one of the reasons I founded SoulPaws, which we'll talk about in a little bit, and why it will always be a free resource, because there are not enough. Uh, and so what happened is there was just so much shame, and it felt like I had failed beyond failing. And in a moment of struggling with suicidal ideation, which I had never kind of crossed into that line, I did with Buster there. He stood to his feet. He put his nose in my chest, and I leaned over him. And it was probably for about 5 minutes, like a quite a long time to just be holding each other. And it felt like he was holding me with his nose in my chest. And he what I've come to understand now, thanks to SoulPaws and several people that are a part of it, was that Buster really regulated me in the most important way. And I think, what I was trying to do was figure my way out of this eating disorder. So I like read every book. I could write a book, recite what to do, to recover, and yet I could not do it. And a huge part of that is because it was so dysregulating to um, deal with that eating disorder voice. And if you're dysregulated, meaning you're stressed, you're kind of in fight or flight mode, you really aren't operating out of the higher functioning parts of your brain where you can make reasonable, educated decisions. You're operating in the lower functioning parts. And I would always kind of fight or flight with food. I would just run to the bathroom or run to the kitchen or whatever. And but with Buster, and maybe that would numb me for a second, but then back there I was again, dysregulated, trying to find a way out, so uncomfortable in my body and in my mind. And the level of comfort Buster gave me, it helped me get to a place in my head where I said, wait, I don't want to die. I want this pain to end. I can't keep living like this anymore. And I left his kennel. I called out of work. I told my boss, I said, I'm sick. I left. I went to a support group. I called my therapist, and I finally became really open to doing whatever it took. And thankfully I had a therapist that accepted community service hours as payment, or charged me a very discounted flat fee so that I could afford to go see a dietitian, a psychiatrist. There were free support groups in San Diego, which I was so lucky to be a part of. And then I adopted Bella, who is now almost 15. And she, like we talked about before this call, absolutely saved my life and walked me through the incredibly uncomfortable, painful journey that is recovering from any mental health issue. We all develop eating disorders, substance use disorders, because as a false form of comfort. And so the recovery process is naturally extremely uncomfortable and scary. And I never would have made it through without Bella. And so that's really my story, and what led to wanting to do something for people with eating disorders involving the healing power of animals. And then I
Right.
reached out to you, Annie, and that became the beginning of SoulPaws.
Oh my goodness, I know. I appreciate the shout out, but really, it's all you, Shannon. So you put together everything, and so Shannon is a national speaker. She's written a best-selling book, and you've just spoken to so many different groups. It's just amazing. So tell us more about Soul Pause, and Soul Pause is national now too, right? So
Yeah.
it has grown quite a bit. So when was Soul Pause founded, and where are you now?
Yeah. So I remember calling you about 9 years ago, and with this idea, and that was SoulPaws Recovery Project. So I think it was around 2014 we were founded. And I became more and more aware of how difficult it was for people to access any form of support. And there were so many ways that Bella continued to support me in any kind of, life is uncomfortable and ever changing. And I just couldn't imagine how I'd do it without her. And I wanted to find a way. I did not know particularly about shelter dogs and their incredibly healing abilities till I started working at the San Diego Humane Society. So it started as an idea like, let's just there's a lot of treatment centers here in San Diego for eating disorders. Let's see if we can bring patients to the San Diego Humane Society, which to me is the greatest place in the world. I know it's changed a lot, but it will always be my home, my family, the place that changed my life forever. I wanted to bring people there and give them some exposure to all sorts of different animals. And so we kind of, I worked with you in the San Diego Humane Society, and we came up with this format where we would have some sort of regulating activity in the beginning, and then in the middle, one-on-one connection time with the animals, whether that was small animals being placed in a basket in people's laps, miniature horses, therapy dogs, and then we'd end with a clinician-led discussion. And what is amazing about this is I am like a poetry person. I'm not a science person. I'm not a researcher. I know, Annie, you are, and you can delve into the research. I think we were just gravitating towards what felt right. But what I know now is I was actually replicating in SoulPaws the experience I had with Buster in every SoulPaws. We call them healing circles now. We were beginning with a regulating practice with the animals, a loving kindness meditation. We now have meditations that are inspired by a lot of different animals. There's a Bella meditation. There's different meditations based on different animals. And then that one-on-one connection time, that is usually everyone's favorite part of the workshop. And I think you are the one that really came up with it and said, listen, we need a period where you're just looking into the eyes of an animal, holding an animal, soaking up all those therapeutic benefits of the human-animal connection. There's no distractions, because when in life do we ever get this, right? We always got a phone ringing in our pocket, something to do, but we have a dedicated time for the human-animal connection and then a clinician-led discussion. So we were doing this in San Diego for a bit, and then I got contacted by our now board chair, Dr. Patricia Flaherty-Fichette, who's the only person in the country who has studied, yes, I know, eating disorders and animal-assisted interventions. Only person. And she said, I love this. She started her own healing circles in Philadelphia. And then one day she said, do you know, this format we have at SoulPaws, it really reminds me a lot of Bruce Perry's neurosequential model. And I said, neurosequential, what? And essentially she said, well, he's an incredible teacher, clinician, researcher. I think at the time, he wrote a book with Oprah called What Happened to You I think it had just come out in 2021 or 2020, about how trauma impacts the brain. And he said he has this sequence of engagement, which essentially talks about how the brain processes information. And, putting it in very layman's terms, it goes regulate, relate, reason. So information coming into the brain goes through it sequentially. So you cannot get to reason right away. You first have to be regulated. And Dr. Perry talks about all sorts of ways to regulate: through rhythm, through movement, through animals, right? And then once you're regulated, you get to the second part of the brain, which is relate, which means if I'm an educator or I'm a therapist working with a child and I want to kind of move them up to those higher functioning parts of the brain, I must establish a connection, like a true connection, not a bullshit connection, right? Hi, I'm so-and-so. Hi, I'm so-and-so. That doesn't work. But if I can make the child feel safe and seen, then they move up in their brain, and to the highest functioning parts, which he says are the parts where we reason, where we learn best, where we think. And that is what I was doing over and over again with Bella, right? I was dysregulated. I was stressed out. I wanted to go relapse, whatever I wanted to do. And she regulated me. I would just sit there and I would pet her and she'd lick my face and I'd just hold her and the urge would pass and she had a way. And this is still, I'm always going to say that we're never going to come up with an exact formula for why the human animal connection is so powerful. I think there's always going to be some mystery to it. And I think that because animals do not speak our language and it is a connection beyond language, we're never going to be able to put it into words. I've tried for a long time to put it into words. I'll probably be doing it for the rest of my life, but I think I have an acceptance now that I'm never going to exactly put what I have with Bella, my amazing therapy dog, on the page or make it make complete sense. But the way she makes me feel safe, I feel safer with her. And that therapist I mentioned earlier, Dr. Materna, I worked with her for 10 years. And she told me, when you started bringing Bella into our sessions, you started sharing with me stuff you never said. And it was because of the safety Bella gave me. So it wasn't just a safety that impacted like me, but it made me feel safe enough to then be more open and honest and vulnerable with the people trying to help me. Right. So it was an incredibly powerful connection. So it was that relate part. And then I could get to the place where I could make these decisions about my recovery or my next steps and whatever I was doing. So she said, you're doing this at SoulPaws in a very kind of precise way with animals. I think Dr. Perry would dig this. And she reached out to him. I don't remember. I'm not a big fan of social media, but I will forever thank social media for this. I think it was Twitter, maybe. And he is such an incredible human. I have to say, he got back to her. He met with us. I think he picked up on the fact that I am not a scientist. And I said, can we kind of call what we're doing at SoulPaws something different, like with your approval, than regulate, relate, reason? Because that sounds very smart and wordy and sciencey to me, and it honestly stresses me out a little.
I know. It sounds very, very clinical, very smart and sciencey.
Exactly. And so we adapted it to be calm, connect, heal. And so now we kind of have those as our 3 pillars. And we had our first, my dream, the big dream, I think, for all of us at SoulPaws. We're a team now of people who, most of us have lived experience in recovering from an eating disorder, or have at the very least been a part of a healing recovery team and have researched it or been a part of someone's treatment. We all, I think, can envision a world where any clinician could become SoulPaws certified and offer healing circles for free to their community, to people with eating disorders, maybe someday to people with substance use disorders, maybe someday to special niche groups, LGBTQ plus groups, young people, etc. And so we held our first SoulPaws facilitator training in January to expand our healing circles. This is, again, thanks to Dr. Perry. We partnered with several members of his team, and then clinicians from where I work at Eating Recovery Center. They completed a pretty robust training that went through the science behind what we do at SoulPaws, the 3 pillars, why we're so dedicated to creating safe, inclusive spaces. And they completed the trainings and are now on the next phase to launch healing circles in Arizona, Indiana, potentially Northern California, potentially Denver, and then Austin, Texas. And then we have one in San Diego. And so it's very exciting because we know there's an urgent need for help, especially accessible support. And it's an amazing thing to see it start to expand and reach more people.
Yeah. And just kind of going back to what you were saying, it is really hard to quantify what that connection is. It's really hard to quantify it, and it is hard to just describe it. But I think that I love how people are paying attention to it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that what you just described with soul pause and how it could potentially be in all these different states really speaks to, oh, people are paying attention, they are understanding, hey, there's something to this human animal bond thing,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not just people who like animals, there's a
Yeah.
whole science behind it.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm so happy SoulPause exists in order to expand those ideas,
Mm-hmm.
and to be able to reach out to more people. I would love to see the same program, and like you were saying, not just with eating disorders, but other types
Mm-hmm.
of addictions that people are working through. I think that would make
Mm-hmm.
a huge difference. And I think that how people introduce animals to patients or residents, that makes a huge difference. You can't just bring a dog in and say, there you go, you're going to get better now. There's this whole, there
Mm-hmm.
needs to be a program, an organized program behind it. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, and SoulPause is one of those. So, yeah,
But
that's
you, Annie, I mean, you helped create that program. There is no way I would have started Soul Pause if you did not partner with me and help me figure out how to get those first workshops going. And I mean, you have been so generous with your time and your expertise and your resources to ensure this thing continued. And, I think another exciting thing about Soul Pause is the fact that, and Dr. Perry actually brought this up. He said because he's worked with a lot of children who have experienced significant trauma and wondering about what his interactions as a clinician would have been like if he had an animal by his side with him, right? And then he also brought up the point that animals are an extension of nature. And I think in our society now that is so behind screens all day long, even as kids now, right? Between their iPads at school and it, we are we are missing out on the healing that is being one and connected with nature. And animals can bring nature to you. And so when someone goes to a soul pause healing circle, it's an incredible experience for that hour. Sometimes it's a 90-minute experience. But the goal is that they will leave there empowered to extend their healing network, their community, extend it to include animals or nature. And so we have one board director who wasn't an animal person at all, but after I met with her, she was looking outside at a bird and she started doing the calm, connect, heal, and really felt such a shift in her own being. And so we're trying to equip people. We want to have frequent, reoccurring healing circles so we can form community, so we can introduce people to trained therapy animals, miniature horses, dogs, rabbits, guinea pigs, rats. Um, who am I forgetting? I always feel like I can't forget any of the animals.
the occasional, very well socialized hamster would do well
Hamster,
too, but it
yes.
really
Okay.
depends. And
Yes.
rats are amazing
I
therapy
love
animals,
rats.
just saying.
I'm saying that too.
Yeah.
We're going to be in Indiana doing healing circles with donkeys. It's very exciting. Um,
Oh,
so,
fabulous.
but I think, to form an accessible, free resource in different communities, but then to empower people to say, if you don't have an animal yourself, that is okay. Get outside, find the animals there, and start creating, bring them into your life. Let a connection with that bird outside. Of course, it's different. It's very different from
Right.
the dog that's in your lap. Feel that grounding, feel that connection, and feel a shift happen in your body and in your brain, right? And so, we hope that it's going to, like you said, create more awareness too
Mhm.
about the therapeutic powers of the human animal bond and empower people to actively pursue that in their lives.
I you also mentioned, because we talked very briefly about the expense, and you
Mhm.
mentioned that SoulPaws is free of charge.
Yes.
But it is a nonprofit, and
Mhm.
so you do need to do some fundraising. So, can you tell us how people can get in touch with you, your website, and also how
Yes.
to donate?
Definitely. So you can learn more about us at www.soulpawsrecovery.org, and that's SOULPAWS recovery.org. There is a link to donate right on our website. And you can contact me at soulpawsbox at gmail.com. We're also on Instagram. We have a pretty cool eating disorders awareness campaign going on right now. And you can find us on all your social media channels as well and get in touch that way. We definitely are also looking for volunteers. That's another way we know everyone can't give a monetary donation, but if you have a passion for animals and mental health, definitely get in touch because we're growing and it's a community based effort, it's a team effort, and we feel really grateful to have a growing team, and maybe if that you could join us. So definitely check us out on social and on our website.
Well, I can't thank you enough, Shannon. Just thank you so much. I'm so happy that I've been able to talk to people about animals and mental health. And you're a prime example of one of those people that really this podcast is about. So thank you so much. And everything that you just mentioned about the website and how to donate, I will also have all that information in the show notes. So if our listeners didn't have a chance to write it down, don't worry, it'll be available to you. So thank you so much, Shannon, and I will talk to you soon.
Thanks, Annie. Bye.
Bye.